The end of the Game of Thrones series has left the continent of Westeros changed forever. Now Bran the Broken, ruler of the Six Kingdoms, will presumably usher in an era of peace and prosperity. However, if we revisit the momentous meeting of the Lords of Westeros in Season 8, Episode 6, it leaves a lot of questions unanswered. For starters, it's hard to imagine this rather rushed accord will have any lasting effect beyond the life of Bran. Yes, he is the three-eyed raven, and we all know that this wizard of time and space can live a long time, but he does not appear to be immortal. Therefore, there will come a time when the most powerful lords of Westeros will need to meet again to choose their next king. And therein lies the problem with the ending that was presented to the viewers during the series finale. A flaw is immediately uncovered in this plan when it is not even clear who is allowed to vote. Sam, Sir Davos Seaworth, Arya, and Brienne cast votes for king. None of these characters are lords, and even they seemed confused if their votes mattered. Other dignitaries to this affair were Lord Robin of the Eyrie, a man that was breastfed until he was at least 10, and he didn't even seem to know what he was agreeing to, as well as Lord Edmure Tully, who, for a brief moment of what can only be considered the worst attempt at reading a situation, tried to present himself as the person who should be king of the up until that point 7 kingdoms. Which leads us into the second flaw of this mighty council. Sansa basically just opts out, and the newly minted King Bran approves without question. Surely it was because he did not want war with his sister and saw she would rule the North justly, but why didn't the other lords just put a halt to the meeting and say, "Oh wait, we can do that? We can just leave the realm? Okay, I choose that. That's way easier." None of this seemed codified in any way. It was legitimately made up on the spot and has no chance of happening again. Bran relented half of his power by allowing Sansa to rule the North independently. Yes, perhaps he could call on her to help him if he is rebelled against in the future, but as an independent kingdom with no fealty, she can just sit home and watch the 6 kingdoms burn. I also found it interesting that most seem to agree with Tyrion that not allowing the children of the current king to automatically inherit the title was a good thing. Except, I guess, for Sansa, who I presume is going to have children that will inherit her title as King or Queen of the North. Now these 2 powerful kingdoms that neighbor one another will have fundamentally different governments. So Bran has already weakened the position of whomever will take his place in succession. Now let us imagine a time in the deep future. Bran has passed away peacefully one evening while warged into a crow. This new tradition dictates that the, quote, most powerful lords of Westeros, whoever they are at the time, will need to meet and choose the next king. Is there any way that this meeting does not immediately end in open warfare? Even if the next anticipated ruler is widely loved by the other lords, all it takes is one bad apple to upset the cart. Not to mention the machinations that would likely take place around this vote, with lords trading favors to get an extra vote towards their own kingship. There would be all sorts of backroom dealings and shenanigans leading up to the vote, and then once completed, those who felt shortchanged can apparently just leave the kingdom, as this new tradition seems to support. Now let's imagine that something like this actually takes place. A new king is named, and an ancestor of Bronn, let's say, decides that the Reach will now be an independent kingdom. What could the new king of the 5 kingdoms do? It's either accept that one of the largest and wealthiest kingdoms is seceding from the Union, or go to war with only 80% of their strength to bring the rebel back into the fold. And 80% would be the best case scenario in that situation too, because it's not a good look when the first thing that happens after you get elected is a large portion of your realm decides to go be their own country. Just ask Abraham Lincoln. From this terribly weakened position, the king would potentially have to concede that the Reach can be independent, and then it would only be a matter of time for the other kingdoms to also follow that lead. This plan was presented as the type of wheel smashing that Dany had envisioned. Tyrion even says so to Grey Worm, but nothing could be further from the truth. Dany believed the only way to bring peace was to completely destroy all the kingdoms and put them under her singular rule. Now we have established a system of weaker kingdoms that will separate into many other kingdoms, each with their own laws and traditions, which could include things like slavery and other nasty business that was completely contrary to all that Dany was attempting to accomplish. In fact, it appears that Westeros is heading towards a future that looks a lot more like Essos, a collection of small merchant republics who work together only to solidify the wealth and power of their rulers. I do not understand this ending. I also do not understand why Jon Snow was immediately given up on. If one considers all that he did to save Westeros, he was the only logical choice. Yes, the Unsullied wanted his head, however, this group of most powerful lords could have easily fooled Grey Worm. As soon as they elected Bran king and agreed to send Jon to the Wall, Grey Worm takes all of his troops out of King's Landing and sails off for Naath. Why not just have Jon leave the city, and as soon as Grey Worm's ships sail, have Jon turn back around and revote and elect him king? It's not like Grey Worm is going to find out that Jon was elected king and then immediately turn back around and come back and fight to dethrone him. Why would he? What would he have to gain by starting another war? Besides, Jon is technically the rightful heir to begin with, and he also did things like make peace with the wildlings, fight off the Night King, help overthrow Cersei, and kill the Mad Queen Dany. He participated in all the major events of Westeros for many years and brought the kingdom to the very point it was at when the vote was being proposed. Additionally, at least 5 people there who apparently had the right to vote were aware that he was the rightful heir. It's the equivalent of George Washington leading the troops of the American Revolution, and then after winning, when a vote is held for the first president, the Congress elects Bob Washington because he had read a lot of history books and when he was younger he had survived tuberculosis. It's nonsensical and not to the benefit of anyone. So now we leave Westeros, a shattered kingdom. The story of Game of Thrones is concluded, and some would say that's a good thing. This show gave me great pleasure and enjoyment over 8 years, and I will miss it. The last season in particular was not the best in my opinion, but all stories must come to an end for good or bad. Many people may have watched my videos and assumed that I disliked this, but to be honest, this was one of the greatest television shows I ever watched in my entire life, and I only can hope I ever see something like this again. In my future videos, I will be covering other shows on HBO or Netflix. Likely The Watchmen is going to be the next big show to cover, but that's going to happen in the fall, so in the interim, perhaps I'll discuss some books I've been reading. I want to take a moment to thank everyone who has watched my first series of videos, and I hope to provide more content in the future. Please stay tuned, and as usual, thanks for watching.